And welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and these are the commander staples that I am putting in my Boros decks. So as per usual in this series, these are the auto includes for me whenever I'm putting a Boros deck together. This is what I use. Gives the people a little bit of guidance in what you should be putting in commander decks, especially if you're newer to the format. And I'm actually going to start this one out with Dockside Extortionist. And the reason why is because I haven't talked about this a lot. Well, I've talked about it on my channel quite a bit, but not necessarily on this series. And I have one Boros deck. It's my Gerard Weatherlight Hero deck. And I have Dockside Extortionist in that deck. And the reason why is because Dockside Extortionist is actually a really good ETB creature. And that's kind of what the deck is doing. I only have just the one Dockside Extortionist. It's only in one of my decks. It is a card that you could put in any deck, obviously. It is a great ramp option there. I like to stick to theme. So for me, I have it in my Gerard deck because it fits the theme of what I'm doing. If you're in a treasure token deck, it can go in there as well. Obviously, you could just put it in any deck that has red, including any of your Boros decks. If you got it lying around, there really isn't much else to say, but I thought I would give it a mention since I happen to have it in my one Boros deck. Let's talk about the removal, and that's something that Boros does really, really well, mostly because of the white, but also because of the red, and two of the best board wipes in the entire format, Blasphemous Act and Austere Command. Again, if you're in any deck at all that's red, I think you're probably going to want to play Blasphemous Act. Austere Command for me is one of the best in the entire format because I like the versatility of it. You can destroy the artifacts or the enchantments or the big creatures or the small creatures, and depending on what you're doing in your deck, you can avoid the things that you don't want to hit, right? Obviously, we can go really, really deep here, especially because we have white with the board wipes. You just pick the ones that fit what you're doing. The other absolute auto include red card for me is Vandal Blast. Again, as far as removal, if you're playing any deck, even a 5-color deck, I'm going to play Vandal Blast because it is the best artifact removal spell in the entire format. 5 mana to remove all artifacts is pretty good, but the fact that you're not hitting any of yours is the huge upside here, right? This gets rid of all your opponent's artifacts and not yours for only 5 mana. And then to make it even better, if you really need to get that one artifact off the table in a pinch, you can do that for just 1 red mana. So you have that option as well. Absolute auto include as far as I'm concerned. Of course, we're going to have Path to Exile and Swords to Plowshares. More auto includes. At some point, I'm just going to have to stop talking about these cards because I think we all know that they will go in any deck that has white if you have access to them. Generous Gift as well. Again, another card that for me is one of the best removal spells in the entire format because it hits any permanent. That's a really important part for me when it comes to removal. So any deck that has white is going to have Generous Gift. Heliod's Intervention, which is one I haven't mentioned yet, I would probably play it in a mono white deck and probably a Boros deck and maybe a few others. Again, it depends a little bit what you're doing. It lets you destroy X target artifacts and or enchantments, and at instant speed, that's fantastic. Also can gain you a bunch of life, which sometimes you might want to use. I myself have not used that option at all because there's always lots of great artifacts and enchantments to remove off the table. But if you're about to die, instant speed, I gained a bunch of life, is pretty good. Rip Apart, as I've talked about quite a bit on my channel, is one of my favorite removal spells in the entire format. And of course, it's an actual Boros card, right? Red and a white sorcery. Choose one. Rip Apart deals 3 damage to target creature or planeswalker, or destroy target artifact or enchantment. So this is removing 4 different kinds of permanents. And again, the versatility really wins the day for me. I know it's a sorcery and people don't like that. I find people typically cast their removal spells at sorcery speed anyway. Being able to remove a lot of creatures, obviously you're not going to be able to kill them all, but you can kill a lot of creatures for 3 damage, get a lot of planeswalkers off the table for 3 damage as well. And again, artifact or enchantment, that's always going to be a target for you. Goes in every Boros deck I'm making, and probably if you're moving up the colors as well, I would also include it. Dyrgar Hedgemage is one, again, that I use in my Gerard deck because it's an ETB creature, but I really think it could go in just about any deck. 2 in a hybrid Boros mana, Dwarf Shaman 2/2. When it enters the battlefield, if you control 2 or more mountains, you may destroy target artifact. If you control 2 or more planes, you can destroy an enchantment. So of course, when it ETBs, if you control 2 mountains and 2 planes, you get to destroy an artifact and an enchantment. And that's not that difficult in a Boros deck. Of course, if you have like a Sacred Foundry, which is both a mountain and a plains, it will count towards both of those. And it's stapled on a creature, right? I always love abilities stapled on creatures because you can reuse them just like I do in my Gerard deck, blink it, whatever. So that is one that I think is definitely a little underutilized that could see a little more play. I also really like Wear Tear. It's a card that I maybe have gotten a little bit away from, mostly because Rip Apart has sort of replaced it, but it's still very usable. It's a split card. The Wear side, 1 and a red instant, destroy target artifact, and the Tear side, 1 white mana instant, destroy target enchantment. So if you combine it, right, this is 3 mana, 1 a red and a white to destroy an artifact or enchantment at instant speed. That's pretty darn good, I think. And then of course, if you don't have the targets, right, you're not going to run into the decimate issue here. If your opponent has an artifact you really want to remove, but there's no good enchantments to hit, you can just cast this for the one side. Maybe people think that card draw is going to be an issue in your Boros deck, and I don't know, maybe it used to be. Mind's Eye is a card that I used to play in a lot of my Boros decks. I do still have it in my Gerard deck. I think it's still pretty good. 5 mana artifact, whenever an opponent draws a card, you may pay 1 if you do draw a card. Man, later in the game, you can just really go nuts with this. Every turn cycle, you're paying 3 mana to draw 3 cards, assuming your opponents are only drawing on their draw steps. That is a fantastic rate. I still think this is a very playable card in the format, but of course, Boros decks don't really need it anymore because of all the great white card draw we've gotten recently, like Esper Sentinel and of course Archivist of Ogma, and we can go on all day. There's so much great white card draw now in the format. Yes, here I go again, that you're never going to have a problem drawing cards in your Boros deck. In fact, I have no idea why no one complains about the red card draw, right? If I'm making a Boros deck, there is 0 red card draw in my deck, and any of the impulse draw, like people always bring up the impulse draw when it comes to red. Why would you ever play that when you can use all the great white card draw we have right now? So for me, I'm making a Boros deck. I'm going to have 0 red card draw and a whole bunch of white card draw. So what does that say? To me, that says white is way better at drawing cards than red. That's just my opinion. And again, you have tons of options here depending on what exactly you're doing. Let's talk about the mana rocks and of course Arcane Signet. This is the last video I'm going to mention this guy. Of course, Arcane Signet go in every deck, so I'm not going to mention this card anymore. Goes in every commander deck. I think we all know that. It is now the 2nd most popular card in the entire format behind Sol Ring, so I no longer need to talk about it, I'm sure. Boros, Signet, and Talisman of Conviction are also great options for you. Both of them are giving you the red and the white that you need. I suppose you could debate which one is better. I'm not the biggest fan of the Signet series because you have to put the 1 mana into it. In a Boros deck though, it's fine because you're putting 1 mana into it, you're getting the 2 colors that you need. People like these a lot in like 3 and 4 color decks, and I can't count how many times I've seen a game where a guy's got a 4 color deck, he's got like 3 of the signets out, and he's trying to do the math and figure out which signets he wants to tap for which mana, and he's using the mana from sub signets to pay for the other ones and trying to get the color combinations that they need. It can get confusing. The Talisman series I like better. It does deal you the damage when you add the colored mana, but you also have the colorless option where you don't have to take the damage. You only take the damage if you really need those colors, and it comes into play untapped. You don't have to put the mana into it. You can use it right away. So that is my preferred option there. Cursed Mirror for me is fantastic. I mentioned this in my red staples video. I would for sure put it in a Boros deck as well. I mean, a 3 mana rock, not great. It only adds red. Okay, but I just really love that ability. When it enters the battlefield, you may have it become a copy of any creature on the battlefield, and it gains haste. So again, now I can copy my opponent's Eternal Witness and get something out of my graveyard, or I can copy one of my creatures like my Deergar Hedgemage and destroy some stuff. Or the dream scenario is I copy my opponent's Blightsteel Colossus and then swing and kill them out of nowhere. Really great card. And of course, Liquimetal Torque, again, just talked about this in my Modern Horizons 2 retrospective. This card is just fantastic in so many different color combinations, particularly in a Boros deck, because Boros, both white and red, deal with artifacts really well, and being able to turn any of your opponent's non-land permanents into an artifact and then easily remove it when you're already going to be casting a Vandal Blast or you're already going to be casting an Austere Command. Just throw a creature in there as well, or an enchantment in there as well. Get that off the table is just so fantastic, I think. This has got to go in there, even though it's only adding colorless mana. Another colorless mana option that I haven't talked about yet is Mind Stone. This still is a really great card. I have it in a few decks. Again, I don't think Boros has any trouble drawing cards anymore, but it kind of used to, so this would go in a lot of Boros decks. 2 mana artifact, tap to add a colorless mana, but you can pay 1 and tap Sacrifice Mind Stone to draw a card. So later in the game, when you don't really need the mana rock, you can sacrifice it. Also, though, red and white both do artifact recursion really, really well. So maybe you're in a deck, maybe that Oscar deck that is doing artifact recursion, great option there, right? You can sacrifice it, get it back, draw another card. So that's another reason why I would probably give this consideration for a Boros deck. The other ramp options, I mean, again, Stoic Farmer, Okeromancer's Map, depends what direction you want to go. You got an artifact that's getting you lands. You got a creature that's getting you lands. Once again, I'm not talking about any red cards here. I'm only talking about the white cards. Boros is very telling that way. When I'm doing the ramp for my Boros deck, I have 0 red cards and all white cards. When I'm doing the card draw, I have 0 red cards and all white cards. So again, I'm not sure why people are always complaining about white with these things and not red. I think red is the worst color in the format. Just saying. There's lots and lots of options in white, especially now for ramping. Again, Deep Gnome Terramancer is another card that you could just throw in every Boros deck, every mono white deck, every deck that has white, in my opinion. It's one of the best ramp cards in the entire format now. That's my opinion. Again, you do have Dockside Extortionist in red, yes, but Dockside Extortionist is reliant on your opponents, right? How often are you going to be able to cast a Dockside Extortionist on turn 2 and actually get more than 2 treasures out of it? You might even get 0 treasures out of it, right? So for me, Dockside Extortionist is actually not a early game ramp option. It's not great for that. It's better later in the game when your opponents have lots of artifacts and enchantments. You know, people don't really take that into consideration, where on turn 2, I'm almost assuredly not going to be playing my Dockside Extortionist because it's not going to give me enough treasure tokens to be worth it. You got to get more than 2 treasure tokens or it's not really worth it, right? Pretty much every other white option is going to be better than Dockside Extortionist early in the game when you actually want to be ramping. Obviously, we can use the go-tos for artifacts as well, like Wayfarer's Bauble and Solemn Simulacrum. Again, a lot of artifact themes in Boros colors, so they could be extra good in that strategy. A couple other things that I want to for sure be putting in my Boros decks is Boros Charm, right? A commander staple for a long time. Red and a white instant. Choose one. Boros Charm deals 4 damage to target player or planeswalker. Permanents you control gain indestructible until end of turn, or target creature gains double strike until end of turn. Those are all fantastic. I have used all of them. Permanents you control gain indestructible is the big one, right? That is a game saver in a lot of situations. And it can even be a complete blowout if your opponent casts something that wipes the entire board. You Boros Charm, you get to keep all your stuff. Huge upside for you. That's going to be the one you're going to be using more than anything. I've used them all though. You can give one of your creatures double strike because you're going to get in for commander damage and kill them, or just close out the game with it. I've even killed my opponent with the 4 damage to a player before. Also gets planeswalkers off the table, so it is a bit of a planeswalker remover as well. Just a really great 2-mana versatile spell that can help you in so many different situations. I think it goes in every Boros deck. Speaking of the lands, again, the usual suspects, land removal, gotta have Graveyard Hate, all that good stuff. Throw Command Beacon in there if you really care about having your commander, which most decks I think do. I will touch on something that I haven't yet, which is the bounce lands, right? So Boros Garrison is the red-white version, enters the battlefield tapped, and when it enters the battlefield, you return a land you control to owner's hand, and it taps to add a red and a white. So it's going to give you the colors you need. It's not ramp though. And a lot of people think of this as ramp. It's not ramp because you're picking up a land and then you're going to have to replay that land. So you're essentially just making the land drops that you normally would. However, the reason why this works, and again, not sure we have to do this anymore in white decks because white has such great ramp options, but in a lot of decks, these can be good because if you're not making the land drops, this sort of gives you another land drop. That's essentially what's happening here with these bounce lands is I make my land drop and I can tap that mana before I pick up the land. So sometimes that can be usable. It's going to enter the battlefield tapped. And then on the next turn, maybe I would normally not make my land drop. Now I picked up a land, so I have the land drop. So basically what these bounce lands do is it just gives you another land drop, which in a deck that doesn't ramp can actually be very usable, right? It's not ramping you, but it is going to give you more mana in the long run, which can be good in a lot of decks that don't ramp very well. But again, white decks do ramp pretty good, so not sure it's necessarily needed, but it is an option for you if you're in a Boros deck. But that is it. That is all. That is my Boros staples list. What did I miss? What do you guys put in your Boros commander decks? Absolute staples for you if you're ever playing a Boros deck. Let me know in the comments below, but that is it for today, and thanks for tuning in.